Seattle sex crimes detective, trafficked to America from Thailand as a child, searches for her sister and for the men who kidnapped and raped them both, while attempting to hide from her police partners that she isn't just investigating sex crimes, she's avenging them. Yes. Human trafficking is what we call modern-day slavery. Mostly it's a lack of independence, a lack of control. I always do a lot of research for my books, and for this one, being less familiar with police work than I am with intelligence work, I did a lot of reading, a lot of books, a lot of articles online. I went to some conferences on human trafficking, developed a few leads that took me to Seattle PD. Livia is a Seattle cop, so it was important for me to actually spend some time with actual Seattle cops. As important as human trafficking is as a topic, and as glad as I am to be writing about it in Livia Alone, the book didn't start with the notion of trafficking. It actually started with the idea of a woman who's a killer. And for the most part, when I write a book, I don't have a super clear recollection of where the initial idea came from. But in this instance, it was a little over a year ago. My wife and I were driving down to LA, and I was unhappy with some stuff that was going on in the television world. And I said, that's it. From now on, if there's going to be any television or film adaptation, I'm doing the writing. Because you know what? They're going to take my character, assassin Ben Trevin, and I don't know what they'll do. Maybe they'll make him into a girl or something like that. And then there's this pause, and I said, which actually could be kind of cool. I was thinking, well, maybe she's some sort of government assassin or something like that. And my wife, Laura, said, no, she's a cop. And immediately I said, wow, that's fantastic. Right, because she's got some sort of hardwired protective instinct, but there's some kind of trauma or something that has turned that protective instinct into a need also to avenge. I know a little bit about human trafficking. I have a college housemate, Daniel Velez, shout out Danny, thank you, who's an assistant U.S. attorney who's done great work against human trafficking. I thought, okay, she was trafficked, she was abused, and that's where Livia Alone comes from. I'm really big on what I think of as indulging your passions. I've written 7 novels. I used to be a lawyer. I spent some time in the CIA. I've done a variety of interesting jobs, but nothing even compares to me, for me, to writing full-time. I just love it. And I didn't know at the time where my ideas and inspirations were coming from when I started out writing. But looking back, I think I have some ideas, and that's what I'd like to share with you today. Where does the inspiration come from? And as Thomas Edison said, is 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration. So how do you get that mix of inspiration and perspiration to make your ideas into something big? Well, I've always been pretty good about indulging my passions. I've had a lot of eclectic interests throughout my life. Some of them are a little bit weird. I got into martial arts when I was in high school, and in fact, my interest in some Japanese martial arts is what led to a larger interest in Japan. Martial arts, always been passionate about politics and government. What I like to think of as forbidden knowledge is something that's always interested me. Forbidden knowledge is something that governments don't want the general population to know. They want only a few select people to know about this stuff. Kinjirareta kinchi is I think maybe the right Japanese for it. So I've amassed a strange collection of books my whole life with weird titles like The Death Investigator's Handbook and 21 Techniques of Silent Killing and Contingency Cannibalism. Really weird books. You wouldn't think that these books would have any practical use, and hopefully they wouldn't. But these are subjects that have always interested me, so I just always read a lot. Weird stuff, political stuff, everything. Spent 3 years in the CIA where I got to learn some of that forbidden knowledge. That was an interesting experience. Also got a look at the way the government functions or misfunctions from the inside. That was also a really interesting and useful experience. And for anyone who's here who's thinking that the CIA is a kind of exotic, really squared away place, I don't want to disabuse you too much, but maybe the best way to think of the CIA is it's the government. So it's like the post office, but with spies. But still a very interesting and useful experience. And my wife and I moved to Tokyo in 1993 because I really wanted to train in judo at the Kodokan. This was a dream of mine. I told her I wanted to work at a Japanese law firm and that it would be really useful for my career. And I wouldn't say that was exactly an untruth, but what I really wanted to do was train at the Kodokan. And that's what I did. So 6 days a week, my poor wife was a judo widow. We were living in Sengoku. We were the only gaijin in Sengoku. And my wife didn't speak Japanese at the time. And I was doing judo 2 hours a night. But I was just so into it. Every night I was surrounded by these passionate people who came to the Kodokan from all over the world because they loved judo. They didn't care. They found a way to make it work. They worked in bowling alleys and gas stations. People from Malaysia and South Africa and Iran, everywhere. So you get this really passionate culture, and I got swept up in that. One morning on the way to work, on the subway on the way to work, I was actually at Otemachi Station on the Chiyoda-sen. An image came into my mind, a very clear, vivid image of two men following another man down Dogenzaka in Shibuya. And I still really don't know exactly where the image came from, but it was vivid and powerful, and it stayed with me throughout the day. So I started asking myself questions. Well, who are these guys? Why are they following this other man down the street? And then answers started to come. I realized they're assassins. They're going to kill that guy. And my wife likes to give me a hard time about this because she says that's a completely abnormal answer. It's like normal people would have a variety of answers. Maybe they want to help that guy. Maybe he dropped his wallet. Something like that. I'm the only one who says, of course, they're going to kill him. But that's the way my mind works. And that's the way I envisioned that scene. So the answer is they're assassins. They want to kill him. But that only led to more questions. Well, why do they want to kill him? Who hired them? What did he do? And I started just instinctively asking more questions. And every time I came up with an answer, the answer would lead only to more questions. I started writing these things down. And it started to feel like a story. So I kept up with it, and to compress the whole thing, 8 years later, I sold the rights to what was then my first book, Rainfall, a 2-book deal. I was able to, it turned into a fairly big deal. We sold the rights in 10 countries, and I got to quit my day job, and I've been writing full-time ever since, which is an absolute joy for me. So looking back, I realized, I think, where did that idea, that image, come from? And I realized it came because there are things that interest me, things that might not seem to have that much practical value, like contingency cannibalism, for example. But they interested me, and so I'd always read about these things and think about them and make them part of every day, just about every day of my life. And somehow living in Tokyo provided a kind of spark. And I think all those pre-existing interests, those passions, were building up in my mind like kindling. Tokyo provided a spark, and my unconscious served up an image. And I think that's where inspiration comes from, or certainly where inspiration can come from. If you indulge those passions every day, if there are things that you love and care about, do those things, make them part of your life, and good things will come from that. Now, how do you go from there? Because we all have good ideas, but unfortunately sometimes it just stops at the good idea phase. Like David was saying, sometimes you get a good idea in the shower. By the way, a little practical bit of advice you might find useful. It's been my experience that I do get these good ideas, good novel ideas all the time at weird times, working out, in the shower, in the grocery store. Whenever my mind is relaxed and wandering, something comes to me. But if I don't write the idea down right away, I almost always forget it. So now I write it down all the time. And the reason I think is this. I think when your mind, when your unconscious is serving up good stuff, your mind at that time is in a similar state to the state you're in when you're dreaming. And we all know that when you wake up from a dream, don't you remember? You can remember that dream at that moment, right? Right when you wake up from it, it's vivid in your mind. But if you don't write it down within a minute or 5 minutes at the most, the dream will be gone as your regular consciousness takes hold. But if you write the dream down, you can remember it. So whenever I have those good ideas, now I either use a dictaphone or write them down. That's helped me a lot. That instinctive process that I followed, asking questions about who are these guys, why are they going to kill this guy, what did he do, who, what, where, when, why, and how. I find these questions are incredibly useful guides. These questions are how stories get written, and they're useful not only for stories, but for anything you want to do, any way you want to live your life, any endeavor, any idea or inspiration you're trying to turn into a reality. These questions provide a roadmap. But for any idea, to make it a reality, any inspiration, to apply the perspiration to that inspiration so that it can become something real, it does take a lot of discipline. And this is another one that I look back and realize, where did I get the discipline to keep working on that manuscript for 8 long years? I didn't have a contract. I had a busy day job. No one really believed in me except, well, I like to think I certainly believed in myself, and my wife was encouraging, although she did also always encourage me not to quit my day job. So somewhere you have to find a way to keep going. And again, it doesn't have to be a manuscript. It can be anything. I mean, if you want to start any venture, if you want to learn a skill, it can be a martial art or a musical instrument, or you want to open a new business, you want to start a restaurant, you want to change something in your life. It's not something that can happen overnight. You have to stick with it. So how do you stick with it? Where does it come from? For me, it came from fear. I realized at some point that the thing that was motivating me to work on that manuscript whenever I had downtime, whenever I was on an airplane, whether it was late at night and I wanted to go to bed, or I was tempted to watch television or whatever, something gave me the impetus to instead work on the manuscript over the course of quite a few years. So what was it? It was this. I was afraid that if I didn't get published, that it would be my fault. I was never afraid that I wouldn't get published. I was only afraid that if I didn't get published, it would be my fault. That I was afraid that I might look back at my life from some point in the future and say, God, what would have happened if you'd finished that manuscript? I wonder what would have happened. And that thought, even now when I say it, it really gives me the creeps, because it would have been horrible to not have been published and have it be my fault. So I was determined to do the things that I could do to maximize my chances of getting published. I conceived of that as my job. My job wasn't to get published. My job was to do all the things that made it as likely as possible that I would get published. My books, I think it's fair to say, are known for their combat sequences, their hand-to-hand combat sequences, martial arts, that sort of thing. And to the extent I'm doing those scenes right, to the extent I'm doing my love scenes right, I think it's because, you want to get the mechanics right. If you don't, it would take someone out of the story. But what those scenes are really about is how the characters feel. It's a bit of a cliche, but like many cliches, it became a cliche because there's so much truth to it. It's don't describe the rain, describe the way the rain feels. And I really like that. So if you're writing an action scene, like a fight scene, how do the characters feel? Are they afraid? Are they adrenalized? Or like what's going through their minds in this extremely heightened, fraught moment of violence? And likewise, if it's a love scene and the two characters are on the verge of what T.S. Eliot in The Wasteland called the awful daring of a moment's surrender, which an age of prudence can never retract. What does that feel like? Worry about that. Focus on that. Don't focus so much about where the hands are and the feet are and anything else that's in the scene. That's necessary, but it's far from sufficient. So what you're looking for here is, don't do a love scene that's like two characters sitting across a table in a romantic restaurant and it's candlelit, and one character leans forward and says, I love you, honey. And the other character says, I love you too, honey. And then they go off and consummate their beautiful love. I mean, not that that's not a wonderful thing in the real world, but in a story, it's just not workable. It's not interesting. So that's my writing assignment or writing suggestion. No assignments, certainly not these days, not from me. But give it a try. I think you might find it's fun, and see where it takes you.